When I was a child, I lived in a small town, and one of the luxuries that we had was premium cable. And I remember being able to go home and flip on HBO and watch the show Brain Games, where it was just quirky little cartoon. But the thing that was the most informative or the most fun for our family was the Saturday night feature presentation. And on that feature presentation, you would see this intro, and the intro would be a camera kind of flying through a town, and then all of a sudden it would head up to space, and the HBO logo would show up like a space shuttle, and it would say feature presentation. And my family would all kind of rush in the room, and we'd all get the popcorn ready because we knew this was a big time event. And so the first time I saw Robert Rose give a presentation, he was in Kansas City at a BMA marketing event. And at the point when he started, he played this clip. And he started to talk about the experience that he had as a young man watching this presentation. And so immediately at that point, I was clay ready to be molded. He had an experience that I had and he had, and we both shared, and he was able to then tie that into the rest of his presentation. It felt like we were cut from the same cloth, and that he had something to offer for the rest of the event that would be in the same vein. So in this show, I talked to Robert Rose and Carla Johnson, the two authors of the book Experiences, the Seventh Era of Marketing. And in this book, they bring both of their worlds together to explain how customer experience is really where marketing is heading and where we have to go. And so to start off, let's let Carla tell a little bit of her story and how she got into the business of storytelling. So tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how, where you came from, what growing up looked like.
Growing up, I'm from a really small town in northeast Nebraska. So I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. I'm the youngest of 5 kids.
Oh, wow.
It was a great place to grow up because I went to a one-room schoolhouse, walked to school sometimes, walked home a lot of times. And it was just a really tight community of people who lived there for generations and generations. So I lived right near both of my grandparents. And so I heard a lot of the family stories growing up, and that was great. So I grew up in a story family and a story culture. My grandfather immigrated to the U.S. from Denmark when he was 14. So I grew up hearing about him. Leaving home, he never saw his mom again. He came with a couple of aunts and came through Ellis Island, and how he traveled across the country and came to live where he did. And that really, it was a big impact on how my mother was raised. And it was because we're such a tight-knit family, we all knew those stories. And so I grew up in a area of immigrants who talked about the old country, who talked about the stories and talked about what life was like. So for me, storytelling was very natural. And then my siblings are very left-brained, and then I came along. And so they're all very science-oriented, engineers, attorneys, things like that. And so when I first went to college, I thought, well, that's probably what I should do too. And that lasted about 2 years because I like the technology side of things, but I'm much more right-brained than that. And I went into history. I have a undergraduate in history and a master's in history. And for me, that came really naturally because I always loved to write, and it was very natural for me to tell stories. And it was fascinating for me to look at cultures and even at business and how society affected how we made decisions and what we did, and that longevity of the story. So that's most of my early background.
Yeah. So also I heard that you did a little bit of time backpacking through, it's like what you traditionally hear people doing. Like, I'm taking a year off and going backpacking, but you actually did it. It wasn't just an idea.
Yeah, a little bit of time. That's a fun way to put it, because some people think, I think about a little bit of time or doing time like at a desk job. So that's what I was doing, is doing time at a desk job, doing what I thought I should do. And I was in marketing. It was interesting when I looked into, should I get an MBA or should I go on and pursue a master's in history, maybe a PhD and teach? I went and talked to both my business teachers and my history professors. And my business teacher said, you'll have a great career. There's a lot of things going on in marketing. I think you'd really like it. I went and talked to my history professor. He said, I spend my days teaching people stories that I love, and the rest of the time I research and I look into things that I love. But if you're thinking about getting a good job, you should probably go get an MBA. So that didn't work out so well. So I followed my heart instead of my head, but that turned out well. And the same when when my husband and I left to go backpacking. So he's a perpetual traveler. He's traveled all over the world. And so we said, this is a great time in our lives. We didn't have kids. It was easy to quit a job and sell a house and leave. And so we did. We took a year and we backpacked through South America and just had amazing experiences and saw different people, different cultures, and it really made a big impact on me.
Carla's journey is amazing, but so is the journey we have seen in the profession and field of marketing over the past century. Here's Robert Rose and his explanation of the 7 eras of marketing.
When you go to university and you study marketing, you are normally taught about the 5 eras of marketing, right? So along with the 4 Ps of product, place, price, and promotion, you're taught about the 5 eras of marketing. And those 5 eras start with the trade era, where we really look at the products that we brought to market, and it's about the fact that we made, manufactured, or created products, and we made, manufactured, or created more than we could consume, so we sold the surplus of them. That's trade era. That moves us into what we would call the production era, which is where mass industrialization and mass production really took over. And our ability to do that was what has differentiated us in the market, our ability to move product all over the country, or the world in some cases. That moves us into the sales era, which is usually normally in the late 20s to early 30s, where really everything became about being a salesperson. Price, what are we getting for what are we paying, became this core driver of what it is we were trying to bring our products and service to market, and really the focus of our marketing efforts. That takes us to the Mad Men era, sort of your favorite, right? So where we look at the marketing department era, where the marketing department was invented, really. It was also where the 4 Ps were invented, and it's really about where the marketing department and the focus on product, and you can start to see the 4 Ps really build themselves. There's the focus on product, making the product aspirational was the focus. Then we have the marketing company, which became brand. Everything became not about the product, but about the brand bringing you the product. That became the main value proposition of what we tried to bring to market with marketing. Then what brings us to really what is kind of commonly with scholars known as the relationship era. This is the 6th era of marketing, commonly sort of recognized by scholars, but not necessarily in the 5 that you would find in university textbooks. That really brings us up through social media and really today, and what Carla and I contend in the book is that we're moving into a 7th, which is the experience era, where customer experience and creating content-driven experiences become the focus of our marketing efforts.
With all this rapid change, it's very hard for us marketers to stay current and stay relevant. We need better tools. So here's Carla on how the attention span of the customer has changed, and then Robert on how the role of the marketer has changed. When people come to me and they start talking about their content issues, they struggle with driving experiences and storytelling. What are you hearing from your clients where, what are those big points of contention they might have about the struggles that come with storytelling?
I think the biggest struggle is that people want to start with the doing part first. I want to tell the story right now, but there's a whole part of this back end that they haven't even brought in first, and it's understanding the dynamics of your own organization and what's your own story. So if you think about that on a personal level, you think about people who you love to be around and people who are just kind of magnetic. They really know who they are and they know what matters to them, and they know what to say yes to and what they say no to with their time. They're very clear about who they are. That same kind of thing is so magnetic about a company story as well. So I always want companies to say and understand, here's who we are as a company, because when you know who you are as a company to start with, you know what to say yes and no to. You're not chasing everything. So that's a big first step that a lot of companies will overlook. They'll say, well, we have our brand platform and we have all of these things, which are nice and are important. And again, like many things have their place. But unless you can bring it into a story form that engages all of the employees that they can bring to life and believe in and bring passion to every day, you're missing a big opportunity. So there's that brand story. And then understanding not just what our product does, but what is it that happens in our customers' lives because of that. So how do we become more relevant to more people more often when we tell our story? And when you look at that, you're able to build a bigger audience because you're not talking about what it is that you sell. You talk about who it is that you serve.
What do you think a marketer who's looking at 2016, 2017, what do you think their days are gonna look like from that experience standpoint when they consider their customers?
The funny thing is, the very first line of the book is, what do you do? What do you do? And then we follow that up by saying, not your business. We'll get to that in due time. But what do you do? What do you do in your day-to-day work life? And we answer that at the very last chapter of the book, where we say, we hope and we believe where you'll end up sort of spending your day is in creating remarkable content-driven experiences for your customers. What we've seen is that content and the effective use of creating customer experiences using content, or just looking at them broadly as customer experiences, has really become the focus. Even if you just look at something as simple as ad blocking and sort of focusing on developing content that people want to engage with as opposed to blocking an ad, that really becomes a more focused endeavor for any marketer trying to sort of manage his or her day. And so ultimately, whether that manifests itself as a customer experience department or an advertising department or a marketing department, I think the day-to-day role of the marketer doesn't really change. In other words, the focus of delivering great experiences to customers has been the marketer's remit from day one. It's the method by which we deliver that great experience that is changing, which is through content and through other kinds of digital and other kinds of physical experiences.
But there is a plan, and we will make it through this. Carla explains her content creation process and how she uses emotion and empathy to change the way she uses content to reach her audience. So, when you create content, how do you go for, or what elements are in that kind of decision-making process on what you're producing that will give people the goosebumps, or that empathy? When they read it, they instantly kind of have an emotional rush, or kind of like immersed into the content. What are those elements?
One of the, I go back to when I worked for the architects, because that was such a huge learning experience for me, as far as what is it that you do that matters to the people who consume what it is that you create, whether it's content, in their case it's architecture, design, the experience you have when you come into a building. And I was talking to one of the designers one day, and he was designing a burn unit for children. So children's hospitals was a big part of what we focused on. And I said, how do you actually do that? And he said, well, we think about what it's like to be a child who's had a traumatic experience. A burn of any type is probably one of the most traumatic experiences you can have as a person, especially as a child. And he said, I look at how does that child feel when they wake up in a hospital bed in the morning, and they're probably scared, they feel isolated, they're surrounded by these sterile white walls and a lot of equipment that's foreign and making noises. And he said they're so scared, and everything about that whole environment is out of scale and intimidating. So he said, I start with what's the emotion that I want to create for them first, and I want them to feel connected to their family. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel, if it's possible, happy. Maybe look forward to what the day is going to be like. And he started with that. What's the emotion that I want to evoke first? And then now, if safety and security and comfort are what I want to end with, then what does all of this around us need to look like? And then how do all the parts and pieces fit together? So for content, it's very much the same kind of thing. What's the emotion we want to create in our audience? What do we want them to feel? Do we want them to feel confident, assured, smart, understand and have empathy for what their situation is? And then what's the content that we need to create? What's the experience that we have to create that creates that emotion for them? And then reverse engineer that into what's the content that we actually should produce, not what do we produce.
Exactly.
Right.
Content marketing seems so simple at first, but that's because we're only seeing the small portion of the bigger picture. The complexities most people see when implementing the process happen when the formula changes in just small iterations over time. So, from content marketing, native advertising, custom publishing, and all the stops between, marketers like me need to be sure to create strategies so we know what we're doing and how to do it correctly. So here's Robert explaining the content marketing spectrum and the definition of the pieces that make up the different frequencies of marketing inside. Recently, you guys put out a video, or you specifically, about the content marketing spectrum, because there's been several terms: branded content, native advertising, content marketing, and they're all effective uses of
course,
the stuff we're doing, but they need to be seen in the light that they provide value to the customer. So could you kind of walk us through that real quick?
Sure. And it's a work in progress, right? And I say right up front that, I maybe haven't captured it in the way that it might ought to be captured. But my whole point, the real idea here is to communicate that it's not necessarily one is more or less valuable than the other. It's that the goals, the creation, and the approach of each is different. And so let's understand that and then apply the right solution for the right job at hand. And so on one very, very far end of the spectrum, you have what we're calling content brands, where companies are developing separate content brands that exist for the purpose of developing value for a consumer. So at the very far end of the spectrum, where you don't even know that it's the brand providing it, is you think of something like Johnson & Johnson's Baby Center, where unless you dig hard, you're not going to find that it's a Johnson & Johnson site. And in fact, they purposely do it that way. Now, they're not trying to sell more Tylenol or sell more, Q-tips or anything like that. What they're trying to do is leverage a value that they're delivering to moms and to dads about newborns and understand that audience to such a degree that they can use basically make everything else they're doing better. Use it as a research platform almost. Moving along to the right of that spectrum a little bit, you have content brands that actually leverage the existing brands. So things like Kraft's Food and Family Magazine, or Indiums from one engineer to another blog, or really, you've got Red Bull's, Red Bulletin and all of the things that they do, where the brand is associated with content. But the content's purpose, again, is to deliver value separate and discrete from the product. Moving along further in that spectrum, you might have something like native advertising, where I'm going to write content that's hopefully valuable to a consumer in some informative or inspirational way, but I'm going to place it in a paid method to get out and sort of pull that audience into my owned media property. So this is where we might see something like, the Netflix Orange is the New Black ad that they placed in the New York Times, which was really wonderful. Moving along the spectrum further, you start to get into branded content, which is, again, paid, usually methods of distribution, but looking at them as long-form advertising, where there might be interesting narratives or interesting things, but they're all about the brand. It's all about the brand. This is things like the Johnny Walker wonderful tour that they took, through Europe. And there's also the Johnny Walker's Gentleman's Agreement, where they actually, Jude Law drinks, on the boat and the whole thing. And then you've got all the way over, even further, where it becomes like the Coca-Cola journey and those kinds of things. It's a spectrum of how much am I promoting my brand and my product using content as a mechanism to get there. On one side, I'm not using my brand at all. And on the other side, it's core to my brand.
Yeah.
All of them have varying degrees of value, but each has a different purpose. And it's just understanding that different purpose that helps us where to bring the right tool to the right job.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people get concerned with the idea that they either have to use their brand or they shouldn't use their brand. And, like on the recent P&R where you and Joe go back and forth about Johnson & Johnson.
We disagree on this. Yeah, we disagree. And he thinks it's incredibly important for the site to be transparent, that it's brought to you by the brand. And he thinks that's an incredibly important piece. I don't disagree with that, but I also believe that there is an application of this like Johnson & Johnson has had where, quite frankly, I'm not trying to drive potential interest in buying my product. What I'm trying to do is deliver value to a consumer so that I can understand them better. And so I use that property, that content, that delivery of content, valuable content, for the sole purpose of delivering value, but also understanding their commitment, right? Understanding their behaviors, understanding them as an audience to help everything else I'm doing, to help product development, messaging, advertising, all those kinds of things, which can drive value for the business, but also doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the brand or purchase intent or top of the funnel types of activities.
Very similar to the loyalty programs and being able to see what people are purchasing and different habits.
Right? Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And, some people may think that that's a little, duplicitous, and some people may think, I don't want to do business with a brand. They may, once they hear that Johnson & Johnson actually owns Baby Center, now all of a sudden they're turned off. Maybe. But that's the reason that Johnson & Johnson keeps it such a secret.
Yeah.
It's not that they're trying to say, we were telling a lie, but, the whole point of this is enjoy the site, get the value out of it that you want. We're just going to run it over here. And I think We're going to start seeing more of that, right? Especially as brands start to use content to drive value where their brand is either not seen as relevant or would be seen as a trust issue. So let's just pretend for a minute that Starbucks wants to launch a newspaper. So Starbucks could fund a newspaper and basically build an audience and fund the news and journalism and make it investigative journalistic, et cetera, and really talk about important controversial topics and keep an independent voice. They could just own it, right? They could own it. They don't have, and it doesn't have to be Starbucks brought to you by Starbucks. It doesn't have to be Starbucks branded. It doesn't have to be any of that. And they could get tremendous value out of having that audience and the data that comes out of that audience. But at the same time say, you know what, we're just going to stay back. We don't want to, we don't want to get in the middle here. We want to let them have their independent voice. Now, some consumers will say, I hate that idea. And the question I always ask is, well, why do you hate that idea? Why is it okay for the Washington Post to bring you? Why, that big corporation, why is it okay for them to bring you the news, but it's not okay for Starbucks? And at the end of the day, the answer is really because they've been doing it longer, right? That's the only difference between those two things.
So I hope you are like me. You see all these opportunities and you want to grab a hold of them and take on the world. You look back at your team and you know with little work, you can have a content marketing strategy that'll help your company win in this landscape. But some of you know in front of you faces a team of leaders that don't consider marketing an important role in the overall success of the company. And that's where the real battle is that most marketing teams will see in the next few years. Getting a bigger voice at the executive table and being there in front, helping our companies lead forward in innovation for technology, for reaching customers, and moving faster and faster. So one of the things I often hear when I approach marketers, and I teach a lot about agile marketing, and I'll talk about experiences.
Your book is fantastic, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
But when I show them, let's go after experiences, they all get like this light on inside, but then they think of the management level,
Sure.
the executive level, and the lack of a seat at the table. And then you see interesting articles like the CMO is the next CEO and stuff like that. Where do you think teams are right now? And what is that gap that's going to help them get that seat at the table to say, look, customer experience is important. We need to be able to lead with this.
It's, I think the biggest gap is in this anxiety that exists about delivering value that's separate from our product or service. So as marketers, we have just grown a big muscle and a habit of delivering content that describes in ever clever ways the value of our product or service. And we're good at it, right? Marketers are good at it. They're good at creating great, wonderful, creative ads. They're great at creating branded content. They're really great at features and benefits and unique value propositions. And we know how to A/B test. This is the muscle that we've developed over the last 40 years as a marketer. That is changing with the way that consumers can now filter what they watch and listen to and view. And that change has meant that we have to change along with it. And so that evolution for the CMO or the director or the VP becomes, how can we create these experiences that may have little to do with the product or service we're putting in the marketplace, but it's just a valuable experience for consumers. And that is scary because, quite frankly, it means we're taking time away from describing the value, right? We're starting to reprioritize the creation of value. And that's new and it's scary and it's innovative and it's interesting and it's fraught with failure if you do it wrong. And it's, and it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. And so I think where you're seeing CMOs sort of come up to the table and basically take that strategic seat is where they're willing to sort of put their job on the line to say, this is not only just a new way of marketing, this is a new way of doing business. And that's where you start to see things like CMOs will be the new CEO and those sorts of things, because really at the end of the day, their job, their remit is really to get great customer value wherever it may lie, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a huge opportunity, but it's not without its pitfalls for sure.
Yeah, it's gutsy.
Yeah, it's right. It's exactly right. These are early days and it's early adopter time. And I think many of these CMOs are, some of them don't want to make that change because it's fundamentally different and their CEOs block it and their boards block it. And then you have senior level marketers who want to change, but feel like if they do, they're sort of going out on a bridge too far and may see the plank sort of disappear behind them and they're left drowning.
Yeah.
So I think it's it's one of those times where really it's about taking risks and doing innovative things, which of course has been the way it's always been, but now it feels like it's a true evolutionary change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's you have to take the risk, not risk on an agency and then fire them when they don't do
That's
well.
exactly right. Well, that's a great point, right? That's exactly a great point, which is you have to take that risk. It used to be that we could delegate that down to an agency, and when they screw up, we just fire and get a new agency. And now we have to bring that competency, that institutional strength in-house. So it has to be us, right? Yeah.
I like to see more and more for marketers is that they're not waiting for permission to do these things. They're saying these are things that need to be done, and we'll lead the conversation. And in fact, it's not a complete conversation unless marketing's a part of it, which it should be.
Yeah, and I love to think of, we've always used the role of CXO to represent everybody, but if you think of it as the chief experience officer, it does encompass everybody.
It
So
does. And really, when you think about what successful marketers really look like, they're mini CEOs because they're responsible for all the different aspects across the company.
Absolutely. So it's such a good time.
It is. It's a fabulous time to be in marketing.
I think you're going to love this book. It's going to stay with you. It'll be on your desk. It'll be in your laptop bag. It'll be somewhere nearby. And maybe it's just a security blanket to know that other people like you are pursuing experience-based marketing efforts. But I really think it's because of the amazing content within, and I consider it as a highly beneficial piece of content that every team should have. So here's Robert and Carla explaining what they think you will like about this book. So who should buy this book?
Yeah, well, of course, I think everybody should buy the book. But what the target people who we hear the most from are people who are looking to change their organization and understand marketing's different role compared to what it has been in the past. So for a lot of people, that's higher level marketing executives, CMOs, but we're also hearing that there's many other people, CEOs, CIOs, who are looking to say, okay, I understand more about now marketing's value that they can bring, and I want to understand what we can take advantage of from their talents and their skills and what it is that they know. So it's really anybody who wants to bring their company into the modern age of business, not just marketing. It's just that the understanding of how to build these experiences is a big part of what modern business looks like.
So if I'm reading your book, what is the next step you think you would want me to take? What's that move forward after I read that book and I'm looking at my content experiences and maybe I'm focused on me still?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing and the biggest place to start, as I find it, is usually looking at our existing portfolio of experiences, right? So that's just a fancy way to say, what are we doing right now, right? We're doing ads, and we're doing print, and we're doing television, or we're doing web, or we're doing Google ads, or, what is the list of things that we're doing in order to create a customer experience? And some of those things are working, and some of them aren't, and we're working on refining the things that we're doing. But most importantly, where in the life cycle of our buyer's journey does it hurt the most, right? We're having a terrible time with awareness. We're having a terrible time nurturing leads through the sales process, and we have a terrible churn out of that. We're having a terrible time upselling and cross-selling. We have a real trouble with churn with customer loyalty, or we're having a real problem with customers advocating our product or solution on other social channels. Somewhere along there, it hurts. And start to think about how could we develop a content-driven experience that helps to ameliorate some of the pain there, right? That helps sort of look at that and how can we make that better? How can we build something that helps us draw a wider funnel at the top and creates brand awareness of our approach of how we solve a particular customer's need or want? Or how can we create a content-driven experience that helps nurture a lead and arm our salespeople with thought leadership and information that helps teach those customers and develop trust? Or how do we develop something that helps create loyalty and illuminate our shared values and illuminate the wonderful things that we have as a company that we want our customers to understand, right? Where can we create a content-driven experience that helps communicate that and start, and just try? And some of it will be great, some of it will not be great, some of it will fail, some of it won't. And it's really about that fast iteration and changing the process of marketing to sort of account for some of this. As we often say, content marketing will never be a replacement for all the other things we're doing. It's additive. For some companies, it will be a small piece of what they do. For other companies, it will be a medium-sized piece. And for some companies, it will be completely what they do. The percentage of which is really unique to your strategy. But I think all companies at some level can benefit from at least some percentage of their efforts going toward this.
So thanks for listening, and please subscribe to this podcast, tell a friend, and share the content. Thank you, Robert and Carla, for all the time and the interviews, and also for this amazing piece of content. And I hope everyone goes out and experiences the 7th era of marketing. All right, well, thanks for coming out today. I think
Thanks,
this
Jeff.
Great.
It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for
Of course.
Yeah.